Jervis, thank you so much for joining me on the Warhammer Film Club. We're going to be talking about some specific films that may have played a role, a bit of inspiration, the sort of thing that's given you ideas over the years when designing and writing games. But I suppose a place to start would be the sort of more general point of, like, have movies played a big role in the history of Warhammer? Have they been relevant?
Well, they definitely have been relevant, and they have played direct influence. There are a couple of movies which will come up in conversation, I'm sure, later on, which definitely had. You can see the influence they had. But certainly, that tended to be a little bit later on. I think early on, they were more kind of like something that made you interested in science fiction and military history as you were growing up. So they had an influence, but it was pulling you towards being interested in those kind of things. So, I mean, a particular one for me, like that, which you can't really see its influence on any of the games that we did, is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is still one of my favourite films ever. I love it. It was on at the cinema recently, and I made my kids come to watch it with me. So you've got to see this. You've got to see it in the cinema. I went to see that when I would have been about 8 years old. It was my birthday treat. I admire my little 8-year-old self, actually, for sitting all of the way through 2001 and still liking it, basically.
Yeah.
But I think that films like that, Planet of the Apes, films, Forbidden Planet, the Godzilla movies from the 60s when I was growing up, all of these kind of things. And then war movies like Longest Day and all quite on the Western Front. So there's a whole bunch of little movies there that kind of like molded me when I was young and made me think I'm interested in this kind of stuff. And that set me up for things that were much more influential, actually, sort of like directly or peripherally on stuff. It also meant that I love movies. I've always loved movies. I've loved going to the cinema. That birthday treat thing was one of our things. You've got to pick a movie each year to get to go and see. That was so it always seemed like a special thing to me.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, 2001, an incredible film, and as relevant now as ever. That's really surprising. Like it's also quite complex and quite deep and quite difficult to watch. So yeah, an 8-year-old Jervis sitting through that and like getting something from that's awesome. That's really cool.
It is. No, I've watched it many times again, and going to see it in the cinema. I was with my three. It's been only a couple of years ago, I guess. I was really not sure. I say my kid. They're sort of like from sort of like 23 to 33, basically.
Right.
So they're quite grown up. I wasn't sure whether they'd like it. They absolutely loved it, basically.
Right.
And they really did. And I thought it stood up. I mean, especially all of the stuff about AI.
Yes.
Things. It first, the special effects are still fantastic.
Incredible, right? And it always feels to me like, as an influence, the special effects and films with those kind of designs, they feel like they've been super relevant, even if not directly. They just give such a sense of the world. It's the same as book covers, really. The sort of pulp sci-fi book covers. Yeah. They're so inspirational, both for gamers and I imagine for the artists and writers and yourself.
No, absolutely. So there are lots of other influences that you draw upon and kind of make you inspired. And I think sometimes it's only later that you can kind of look back and say, "Oh, okay, I see where I got that idea originated from."
Right.
But I think that so early on, there weren't terribly many movies when we were growing up, and when Warhammer was first coming along. So looking at my little set of notes that I've got there,
yeah.
so I've got to make sure I don't forget things. But I think that when you're saying things that had proper direct influence, then probably the Mad Max films,
right?
Particularly the second and third.
Sure.
I tend to look at Mad Max. It's a canon, as it were. You should be looking at all of this, and I'd say that was probably more influential than Star Wars.
Right.
Was for me. The look of it, it was grimy, it was dystopia. The buggies, in particular, once you start getting the first movie was, the budget was tiny for Mad Max 1. And so the cars are basically just ordinary cars with a machine gun strapped on, something like that. But then once you get to the second and third movies, then you're starting to get stuff where it's hugely influential on orcs in 40k and the look of their vehicles, but also was hugely influential Dark Future, which was basically the Mad Max game that Games Workshop brought out, which was very much like that and Death Race 2000, which is a movie from the 70s with lots of cars with machine guns and things on. So I think that you also get. So you dive in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's it because Mad Max. Yeah, I mean, I think the first one you can see that Dark Future relationship so clearly, especially with that first one, can't you? Because it's sort of normal, but also sort of dystopian. Like it's only a few days or a few weeks or years after this, whatever this dystopian calamity is, and that's kind of very much runs through Dark Future. And then, like you say, the second and third ones feel, it's almost straight into Gorka Morka at that point, right? It's fully orcified.
No, it really is. It's got and the clothes as well. I think start to become much more kind of like 40K ish. There's the design was great. And it's carried on. I mean, the more recent ones are great as well. I think there's some fine movies there. I think the other one that's a little bit like that was a little bit influential. I would say for me was Zardoz. I don't know if you remember Zardoz with Sean Connery.
Sure, yes,
little science fiction film, but the music in it, the look of it, again that dystopian future, I think there's darkness to Warhammer 40K. All of the things have got that kind of rather British, that period of time. You're getting in 2000 AD, but you're getting in films and stuff. Yeah, this kind of rather bleak view of humanity and what the future might hold, and what you learn from history too. So it kind of like influences Warhammer's background, influences 40K's background, I think.
Sure, because there's a lot of stuff in Zardoz around like guns are forbidden and things like that, and they're like destroyed by the statue and Connery himself. I mean, the design, Connery's costume design.
It is a bit on the S&M side, I have to say.
It is, yeah. I mean, and I often it makes you wonder, like with that kind of thing, whether that flowed into like were there artists who were like, oh, I'm going to design a character, or sculptors who were, I'm going to make a miniature that resembles some of these characters, whether it's Mad Max or Connery's character in Zardoz.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, you definitely get that. I mean, artists steal, as it were.
Sure.
You're influenced by ideas all around you. The important thing is how you then take some of those ideas and concepts and remold them for your own use, rather than just making a pastiche or a copy of those things. If you get stuff that excites you, and you think, I want to do something with that, that idea excites me. I'm gonna kind of like work on that and build on that. In the things that I'm doing, so you'll get references through to lots of bits of culture that whoever the creative person is has been exposed to it will influence their work, and you'll see it. You'll see elements of it. Isn't Nobody's ever going to do anything that's like totally and utterly original. It just doesn't seem to happen.
Were there ever any like guidelines around that kind of thing, like internally, like the limits of? Yeah, I'm assuming you couldn't just literally drop a character in who was just a carbon copy of something else.
Occasionally, I got told off for doing things too literally. I guess Sly Marbo is probably the best of that. Sylvester Stallone is Rambo.
Sure.
So there were a couple of things like that. I think there's so Sly Marbo, very much influenced by the Rambo character in the Rambo movie. Loved Rambo 1. I think is a great film.
It is
a bit like Rocky 1. It's like it's like both of them are fantastic movies from that period of time.
Yeah.
And again, quite kind of got that cynical edge. Certainly Rambo does. It's quite bleak. Characters interesting and over the top, and definitely worth stealing. I think for me, the other character is I'm going to forget the name now. That's ridiculous. Sorry, having a senior moment here. I'll just have to come back to that one later on.
Sure.
Sorry.
Was it an Arnie or a Sly?
It's no. I'm just sorry. This is really ridiculous of me. It's a very important character in terms of the Dark Angel's background, the one who's spiraling his way towards the center of the galaxy, the sort of the gunslinger, broken
Sure,
sword.
no, and I also can't remember, so
I really should be able to remember that
I
because I
can't
invented
help
the
you out.
character.
I'm sorry.
What I can do is I can tell you about that character because well, he was influenced a lot with the Clint Eastwood movies,
Right.
and No Name. I love westerns, and so in particular things like High Plains Drifter and Outlaw Josie Wells.
Hmm.
Uh, um, uh, that kind of character, the man with no name character, I found amazing, and I love all the spaghetti westerns. Again, which are really quite again they've got that cynical edge. They're over the top, quite violent. Um, and so the I take elements of that, kind of mix it in, and create a character which was kind of like it's quite subtle, but it's a nod towards those films. And I'll do stuff like that. There's in if I got the opportunity when I was doing, particularly when you're doing special characters,
Hmm.
I said I could base this a little bit on that, and use that to influence me, or come up with an idea. Cipher. Finally.
Okay.
God. Sorry to all of the viewers. Sorry. All I can say is I'm retired now. It's been a long time since I worked on 40K. Yeah. So Cipher.
Right.
Yeah. You look at Cipher and you think of Clint Eastwood and the Man with No Name movies, particularly when you read the early background for him, which is the one that I wrote. He was very much influenced on the Man with No Name character, because what tends to happen with that character is that he turns up somewhere and people try to get, and he's deadly. People try to get him to help them do sort of some evil kind of thing, and it almost always backfires on them. It goes wrong for them. So Cypher's early rules had a kind of thing like that where you could use him, but it could quite often be your downfall if you did. And he had the pistols, so he was a great gunslinger.
Right.
He also had the broken sword, and that was actually a reference to a TV series I loved when I was a kid called Branded, which was about a bit like it was a Western again. And the beginning sequence has the main character kind of leaving this US cavalry fort. They pull all the buttons off of his uniform and throw his hat on the ground, I think. And then they take his sword and they snap it in half over somebody's knee and give the two halves back to him. And he has to go out, like disgraced for something dreadful that he did. But obviously, he didn't really do the thing that he got disgraced. So you've got this whole TV series, which is about him kind of like redeeming himself. But I really like that idea stayed with me. And so I used that on Cipher too, because it fitted so well. The idea of some of the dark angels are, they've been banished, they've fallen, it's gone wrong for them. And I really, for me, that I find the Dark Angels the most interesting Space Marine chapter because for me they're on the fault line between being loyal and being chaotic. So much so that during the heresy, half of them went over to chaos and half of them didn't. But it means that the remaining Dark Angels, the loyal Dark Angels, they're really on the edge. The way they act is almost Chaos Space Marine-like.
Sure.
And in particular, the way that they treat the Fallen. The Fallen have actually, in many ways, learned. By having fallen, it all going wrong, they've kind of moved on and realised that maybe this isn't such a great thing. So for me, the Fallen were more like, were trying to redeem themselves.
Right.
And Cipher was an element of that. So that was my story. And over time, it's got changed, and I think the Fallen are a bit more straight up bad guys now than I imagined back in the day. But I think that you can see there the way that culture, the things that you're growing up with all around you, that you really love, they kind of resonate with you, and you want to kind of incorporate them in. And it can sometimes be very literal, like the Sly Marbo character, but or the pistols that Cypher's carrying. But also it can sometimes be more subtle, where it's about their motivation and that kind of like theme that you've got running through that.
Yeah. I'm always really fascinated by, because it's dead easy, or it's often easy to, it's like identify a Sly Marbo, right? You can sort of say, oh, I can see the inspirations there, right?
Yeah.
The broken sword, that's really interesting because I would have naturally thought, oh well, it must be a reference to the book, the Paul Anderson book. But no, it's a reference to something else. And actually, it's not even a direct reference. It is like, oh, I love this trope, I love this idea, and I'm going to try and find a way to, where in a place where it's sort of sympathetic and makes sense, I'm going to bring it in. I
Yeah.
mean, I imagine there must be loads of examples, and probably, I imagine a lot of them are forgotten now because they're just you watch something or you read something, and it's like, oh, I love that idea. I love the way that plot worked, or I love this little twist, or I love this character trait. I guess I'll see if I can find a suitable place to use something similar or the same sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are things sometimes you want to do a little homage to,
Right.
and it's often that. Can't remember exactly where I did it, but so there was a band I used to really like. Well, I still do actually, called Vantagraph Generator. Uh,
Right.
Weird kind of like 70s prog rocky jazz kind of band. But they had some of the songs they had were very 40k. About kind of like something. There's one about sort of an undead army, and the army. There's a line in it where the army is they march on their ranks unbroken by descent. And various other like, and I think I managed to finally get that in as the name of a rule somewhere or another. The things that I worked on,
Right.
just as a little kind of like nod to Vandergraaf Generator. So I think that there's that you often you're just thinking, it's, you, I mean, it's a subtle kind of like thing, but it gives me a lot of pleasure and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think, there are other movies, getting back to which I think are probably worth talking about because which aren't science fiction movies as such, from that period of kind of like the 70s, because I think for the original designers, the 70s was a very important period of time, and that's Apocalypse Now, about Vietnam. But boy, yeah, that's a dystopian view of the future, and kind of like, there's so much stuff in it. But the helicopters. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Sure.
I mean, it's the quotes and things. Often something like that will be something that will inspire you, and then you'll kind of like do your own version of that kind of like thing. But like Apocalypse Now definitely kind of like influenced me in terms of the way that the view of the war, and I don't know, it's kind of visceral kind of like closeness of it all. I think it's an extraordinary movie on a lot of levels, but it was definitely influential. And on a slightly cheerier note, Kelly's Heroes.
Right.
I go with Clint Eastwood. I mean, everybody, all of the old games, we all love Kelly's Heroes. So, and I can't remember whether we ever managed to put a paint shell in as one of the bits of ammunition for a tank or something like that. But I know we must have talked about it. Again, it kind of like that. The anarchy, the look of the vehicles and stuff. We liked it because the Tiger One tank actually looked a bit like a Tiger One tank. And things. So so I think war movies. But particularly those two, I'd say would be ones that. But again, it's as much about tone and kind of like the way that you imagine a battlefield to be.
Sure.
And then how you try to make the rules reflect that. So, Kelly's Heroes would influence the vehicle design rules because it's got that whole kind of bit about the thin armor on the back and like thin armor on the shirt and stuff going on, in there that you can see reflected in the vehicle rules in 40k, so on.
Was there any? I mean, because it's really interesting, especially when you're like so many influences for tone and that sort of feel can come from those kinds of films and stories. It's possible in certain places for that like a slight misunderstanding to be like replicated from they've Hollywoodized something to make it work for a film, and then we're going to take that and make that into a rule or a part of the setting. But I'm guessing that might have been counteracted a little bit by how like aware of history so many of GW's designers seem to be.
Absolutely, I think that. I mean, certainly go for the original. Rick and Nigel both did archaeology at university. I love military history. Read loads of it. Andy the same. Uh, you know, you know, and the first war games that we played were historical war games. So when I started wargaming, I think it was before D&D came out. There really weren't any fantasy and science fiction things out there, so you had to make your own. So it kind of like you took a hobby again. It's that kind of thing. You take cultural influences and you kind of say, well, we could do this. And there was a lot of that going on at that time. It's say D&D being the classic example of kind of fantasy and science fiction starting to kind of influence war games design. But we'd have to make up our own stuff as well. And so you can see that with the stuff that Rick and Hal were doing and Brian Ansell before they came to Games Workshop. They were designing games because there weren't very many games out there that allowed you to do the kind of stuff that you were seeing in movies, reading about in books on the gaming table. But you were also, because you obviously start with historical war, you have to be interested in military history. It would be weird if you just decided, I'm going to fight ancient battles now just because, I don't know, it seems like a fun thing to do. So I was always interested in military history and I say war movies, were around. I was, I think back in the 60s, it's only 20 or 30 years after the Second World War had finished. Sure. It's fresh. It's like, so it was as close to me when I was young, as 2002, 2001 year would be for kids. Sure. It's very close.
Yeah.
So those things influenced you, and the games that you played influenced you, and then the things that the movies that you were seeing, kind of like fed into that. But we were aware of Hollywoodization of stuff. I think that when one of the nice things about working on fantasy and science fiction was that you can lean into that. You're not trying to do a realistic simulation, got any sense at all. Basically, you're not trying to do a simulation of things. So we could, we take the tropes, the classic kind of like tropes, and then you definitely be informed by things that you've read about history. I mean, I read a lot about the Russian front. So, I mean, there's, in terms of history influencing things rather than movies. Okay, slightly off topic. The Battle for Armageddon board game and all of that. That's the Russian. That's Operation Barbarossa from World War II. The map. If you know where Leningrad, Moscow, and Sevastopol are, then you can kind of go, there seems to be a hive here for each of those. So, but more importantly, the way that we described the big battles, I think, in the Adeptus Titanicus, and then on into Space Marine and Epic, were very much influenced by history that we'd read about World War II. And it really influenced my games understanding of history. Influenced my games design on Epic Armageddon, which was a very pared down version of the rules. Wasn't terribly popular with players, but was mainly concentrating on the suppressive effect of firepower, basically. Which, as I understood it, was the important thing. You get people to put their heads down, and then you attack them, and they surrender. Generally, it's kind of like what military combat is about. Really, there's fix and flank as well. Epic Armageddon focused on those things, and then where Epic 40K, I should say, Epic 40,000 focused on those things. But I think it was too abstract as games design, and so when we did Epic Armageddon, we added a lot more of the crunch and detail back in again, and it still. I think the two of them probably, if you were looking for them, the closest to what a battle is like in the 40k range, they're probably the most realistic. But I really hesitate to, they're not simulations. They're not. They're just closer.
Yeah. Do you think that's what like made Epic 40k struggle? Because it was always like it was visually impressive with the like suppression, like the little explosions and stuff. They look great. It looked amazing on the board.
I think what the lesson that I learned is that what I did with that game was I came at it as a rules writer, I was interested in the game as a whole, and kind of like it reflecting what I'd been reading about in books. So I can remember having a big whiteboard and writing these things down that we wanted to capture within there. So that was one of the main drivers there. And what I forgot in the process is that actually tabletop wargaming is a collecting hobby where people buy models and then get to use them in games.
Right.
So I had a kind of like a road to Damascus moment when I like thinking back on it. I thought, particularly when I was starting work on Epic Armageddon, I thought this is interesting, isn't it? Because effectively, the level of detail in rules is driven by the level of detail in the models you're using for those games. So if you can look at a model Lehman Russ tank in Epic and you can see that it's got different guns in the Swansons and different guns in the turret, then you want that to be reflected within the rules. On the other hand, you can't necessarily see, like what grenades any of the infantry have got, and
Right.
like those small bits of kit and stuff like that. So you're not worried about those. You don't want to see those reflect. You don't need to see those reflected in the rules. So from then on, what I'd do is I'd always keep in mind that I was designing the game to enable people whose hobby was collecting miniatures to play games with the miniatures that they'd collected. So the models came first, that collecting hobby, and how do I collect, and how does the game help me with my collecting and what I'm doing. That became very important. And I'd look at the models when I was writing the rules. I always wanted to be able to see them, so I could see what they looked like, and like the impression that they gave, so that then I could write rules that reflected what the model looked like. Yeah, that was the important thing. So I learned quite a lot from that. But nonetheless, a game's a game as well. So Epic 40K. There are still people who enjoy playing it. I know that. I think that we've all got that bit of the collecting hobby. Again, it's one aspect of what makes you a hobbyist. I just think that for tabletop wargaming, it's probably the most important, really, because why play tabletop games if you don't want to collect models?
Sure,
just seems like wouldn't you choose a different hobby like board games, for example, or role playing games or something? It was very important at the time for me to kind of realised. But again, slightly off topic.
Sure, yeah. Well, you mentioned before, so the opposite of like getting closer to realism. You mentioned Star Wars before, right, as not being particularly significant, which is really interesting because 40K feels very, very different to Star Wars. But Star Wars is this huge cultural phenomenon, has been for a long time. So was that ever a conscious thing, or did it just organically, it didn't ever felt right to borrow from that?
I think it was. I don't think it was a conscious thing. I just think that it was. In particular, in those early days, you've got to remember. Rick in particular was so influential on the way that the IP was generated. The games, Rick and Brian, and I'm sure they perfectly liked Star Wars, and enjoyed it, but it wasn't. It was a bit too American,
right?
I think. For them, it's got and had a very basically its underlying message is one of hope and heroism, basically. And so I loved Star Wars. I went to see all the movies. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a great game, science fiction movies like that that you could watch. But I can't remember there's ever kind of like really saying, well, what should 40K be more like Star Wars? Wouldn't that be a good thing? We've got our other drivers, really. And back then, particularly, we were a niche little tiny company doing our own stuff, making our own things. And I think that, especially when you look, if you look at Warhammer, then you can see how there's an element of it being kind of like growing out of a range of miniatures for D&D. Basically, so the first digital miniatures were really designed for Dungeons and Dragons, and Warhammer came along and kind of built on that and built it up into its own thing, which focused more on fighting armies against each other. 40K from the get-go was like built in-house and designed in-house. Didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So Rick was able to come up with this extraordinary background, influenced by the history that he'd studied at university, his own kind of sense of humour, and kind of like dark, kind of like thing, and that love of those kind of like 2000 AD, that dystopian kind of view of things. And that's what he wanted to do, and so that's what we got. Now, you can there's an element where you kind of say, well, the Space Marines are a lot like the Starship Troopers, but yeah, you can kind of say that, but that the idea of powered armor stuff has much more to do with like the Starship Troopers book by Robert Heinlein, which was a huge influence. If you're looking at books, then Dune and Starship Troopers, very influential on some of the background, but also particularly the way that the armies are organised and they fight and the kind of equipment and things that they've got. So that idea of powered armour had been around in science fiction forever. So it's just an obvious thing to do. Rick's clever thing was to base them much more on kind of Roman legions, monastic knightly orders, and take them in that direction rather than kind of like shiny science fiction that you'd get in other places.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a useful link to something I think you can definitely say, yeah, this absolutely really influenced games with Games Workshop, and that is Alien, and especially Aliens.
Right.
I think that both of which are my top movies. I just love them both.
Yeah.
I've got Alien is quite funny. I would have been about 18 or 19, I guess, when that came out, and I was doing a trip. We and some friends, we were going to go to Mexico, and we had to stop in Dallas on the way to Mexico. And I'd heard that there was a new science fiction movie out called Alien, and that's all I knew about it. It was a new science fiction movie that was called Alien. So I managed to convince my friends, we really must go and see this. And they were not kind of like me. They were geeky like I was, basically. It's a science fiction one. So we went to see Alien, and I can remember looking along the row at them as after the chest burster sequence, and it was just like they were. Kind of, and then I came out. They were, what did you take? I said, I thought it was just going to be a science fiction movie. I didn't realise. But anyway, so Alien. I love that film, and I think what it did was I can remember reading an interview with Ridley Scott where he said, I told the set designers that I wanted the spaceship to look like the cabin of a B-52 bomber, not like a Star Trek kind of shiny kind of science fiction things that you've generally seen before. And I think that kind of look, for inside the spaceship and just the feel of it. Again, some of the weaponry, the little flamer, going down the ducts, and obviously the alien itself, had a big influence. And then Aliens came along, and it was just like, oh my god, this is a war game. It's like Alien made into a war game. It's just we all loved that movie. I mean, it's relatively late. I mean, I'd been working at Workshop by then. It's like, so I'd have, and obviously it influenced Gene Stealers and Space Hog. It was hugely influenced by Aliens, in particular. And I think it was Brian who said he wanted that. Now Rick and Hal had been playing spaceship boarding games for quite a while. They'd been doing this, and so the idea of floor plans and things like that. I think what took it up a level and made it such, I think, an iconic piece of design. It's still, I think it's definitely the best thing that Hal ever did, and arguably the best game that Games Workshop's ever published. I would say. Was to have it being so asymmetric. So you've got the Space Marines, like their firepower and their guns and things like that. On the other side, you've got the aliens who are ferocious if they can get close. Was great. And it had lots of little nods to the movies. There's the cat, which is a nod back to Alien 1 in one of the scenarios. cyber altered something or other.
It's something like with it's a little robot on tracks, isn't it?
Yeah. So Hal, it was like, I've got to get a save the cat mission in. Basically, I've got to save the cat. I've managed to lost my thread of thought then. How it's save the cat mission, but so they design games like that, but I think that extra little bit just took it up a level. And out of all of the games that Workshop's ever done, it's the closest, other than what are actually, like Lord of the Rings. Where you kind of say, that was inspired by the Lord of the Rings movies. It was closest to the inspiration. I think that was it. That was the other thing that I think that Hal did very well, is he knew that both Alien and Aliens were at their heart horror movies. Aliens more of a thriller, Alien a proper full-on horror movie. And putting the timer in, that the Space Marines captured that so well. It's such an elegant piece of games design. Which is why it's just crazy that we took it out in the second edition of the game. We put it back in again in the third once we realised that it was a mistake to have taken it out at all. But it made it feel, when you're playing Space Marines, you're sweating and you're scared, basically. You just don't think you've got enough time to get anything done. And you're worried you're going to make a mistake that's going to lead to you being killed horribly, basically, because those gene stealers get to you. Then you are toast, basically. There's going to be no saving. I love the game, and also those two movies would be my top 5. Yes, I just love both of those films. So having a chance to work on Space Hulk, that was an absolute joy.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, because it is timeless. I think it stands still as a much loved and amazing game to play. And most of the editions as well. I think there's things to be enjoyed across all. Well, I think it's 4 editions now, isn't it? But I think the 4th is basically the 3rd, more or less.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was just brought back out again, basically.
Yeah, but it did, and it's also not unique, but relatively unique amongst GW games in that it's like a discrete thing. Like you can play it, and it's you play the entirety of it within itself, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. It's a kind of a closed system, basically.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Around about the two combatants and that asymmetry. To the extent where Brian Ansell actually wasn't terribly happy with the game's design. Finally came, he said, "No, this is too close. We're not going to be able to do expansions for it. I wanted it to be the start of a whole range of spaceship boarding things." But we tried to write rules for things that with guns on the other side and stuff like that. They just never really worked out really well because it's so pared down. It didn't need a lot of granularity in the way that the weapons worked for each side. So Hal didn't put that in. Whereas if you've got a system that you're going to expand, you have to leave a little bit of elbow room in the game mechanics so that you can slot in, like an Eldar shuriken cannon or something like that. Yeah, do you know what I mean? There's got to be some lever that you can pull that says, okay, well, because it goes back to that, the model looks different. So there's no good just saying, okay, just treat it like it's an assault cannon, something like that. Don't worry about it. Because people, it's very pretty fighters like flechettes and stuff like that. So you've got to have enough kind of levers to pull within the game mechanics of the game. So you say, well, it's not the same. It's subtly different in these ways, basically. And the Space Hulk game system didn't have enough of that in it to really make it expandable. But that's okay if you ask me.
Yeah,
it's not an absolutely great game. So not to be permanently be in the game solution range. I'd never drop it out. I just leave it there. Like I don't know, like Cluedo and Monopoly and stuff like that. It's just around.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's really interesting though. Is that have any bearing on like Advanced Space Crusade? Because that was an opportunity to like, okay, well, instead of Terminators, this time it's going to be Scouts, or it's going to be Orcs, or it's going to be Imperial Guardsmen.
Yeah. Yes, to an extent. I think that the Advanced Space Crusade, obviously that you've got Space Crusade that was being done, and part of the deal was that we got to do one ourselves. And so um, uh, it definitely, that game system is bigger. It's got more levers and things that you can pull. Unfortunately, I mean, Space Crusade was a really important lesson for me as a game. Another important lesson for me as a games designer, because you learn by making mistakes. Really, yeah. And that doesn't stop Space Crusade being a cool game. Lots of people, loved it at the time, but it was way too complicated for what it was trying to achieve. It was just, it was I got completely carried away with subsystems and mapping stuff and all kinds of weird things. So you're exploring this giant ship and all kinds of, and then making sure that it was a system that we could add extra models in, and so any part of the 40k range could work with these things. So you end up with this huge kind of like slab of the game, and like almost the opposite of Space Hulk. Space Hulk teach very quickly and it's immediately kind of like there. Advanced Space Crusade was more of a kind of like a marathon session. But I designed it, and it didn't sell as well as we wanted. And we got left over. We'd got somehow or another. We'd got quite a lot of the floor plans and the plastic screws left over. And so I can't remember who, Rick, Brian, Andy Jones, maybe, came to me and said, "Well, what we want to do is we want to use these up by making it really simple, like game. It just uses these." And I'm going to forget the name of it now.
This Tyrannid Attack.
Tyrannid Attack. Yeah, right. There we go. Sorry, game. Just
that's all right.
And it had to be. The idea was that it would be something we could put into toy stores so they could sell it, people could play it. So it had to be very simple. So I designed it, simplified everything down, and then when I played it, I thought this is actually more fun than Space Crusade, and is basically doing the same thing. It's just doing it in a much more straightforward kind of way. So that's when I learned to murder my darlings, and the offenness is more keep your eye on, like focused on what it is you actually want to achieve, rather than what you could achieve and what all of these cool ideas. Like what are the 3 things that you want the game to do, not what are the 10 things that you want the game to do. All of that kind of stuff. It really kind of taught me that, doing that bit of a redesign of basically the same game with more or less the same pieces, the same floor plans and models, but you can play it really quickly, and it still had the rolling board and stuff. It was fun. I enjoyed playing it quite a lot, actually. Okay. I remember that. But yeah, so I mean, Aliens, but there are so many movies coming out in that period of time, like in the 80s, but again, not necessarily directly having an influence, but you've got to mention Blade Runner. Again, just an awesome movie, hugely influential. We all loved it. Again, that dark kind of like view of the future, the hidden robots kind of like thing that you also get in Terminator.
Sure.
Another great film from the 80s. That was well, I guess Terminator. The Chainsaw Warrior game is very Terminator-y in many ways. It's kind of that kind of vibe to it. And Predator, of course.
Yes.
Got to mention Predator. All of those films. I mean, it's interesting. I was chatting to somebody recently. Had we watched? I can't remember. We watched something or another. Oh, I know. It's the Aliens TV series that they've just recently had on the TV.
Right.
And saying, actually, really, there's a place where, all of the 80s IPs are just all put into one. I know we've had Alien versus Predator, so that was sort of, but you could have Alien versus, Alien, Predator, Terminator, all of those things could easily be one kind of gigantic kind of IP. And Games Workshop games came about in that same period of time. So I think that the tone of them, the feel of them, RoboCop again, you kind of look at in that kind of way. Starship Troopers, again, there's a very similar kind of vibe that is still there in 40k in particular. I guess Rambo. But I mean, all of those films. I mean, for me, especially, I think Blade Runner is just the director's cut, of course.
Sure.
Voiceover, so much better without the voiceover.
Yeah.
The problem is that, of course, you've seen it with the voiceover, That's what I'd love, is to be able to forget the version with the voiceover and just watch, the director's cut. You get fresh.
Yeah, yeah.
Just go to the cinema and have seen it for the very first time ever. That would be awesome.
But that's often the thing, especially with classic movies like this. Is it would be amazing. I mean, Alien or Aliens, to see those for the first time again, because it feels like, I'm sure there was a first time when I saw those movies. I mean, I don't remember the first time, so it's kind of always existed. Whether that's through influences it's had on other stuff, like it has been. These movies have been present through 40K or through other game worlds for me. So it's kind of always been there. So I don't feel like I don't remember the first time I saw some of these, and it would be lovely to do that.
And I can remember a couple of them. It tends to be more about the like so Alien. I remember because it was a weird story, and so the first Star Wars opened in the West End when I was working in a game shop called Game Centre, and it opened around about Christmas time, and I'd been to see it when it opened almost straight away. It was amazing, and it was at a cinema very close to where Game Centre was located. And the boss at the time, Greg Levin, bless him, basically decided that he wanted to open on sort of like it was either Boxing Day or New Year's Day or something like that. It was like this day that was a holiday, and we were in the shop, and Graham wasn't around. He hadn't actually come in. So there were about 3 or 4 of us in the shop, and nothing was happening. Totally dead. So we went in relays to see Star Wars. It was running all the day. I can remember that. I can remember going to see it. I can remember the second time I went to see it very clearly because of that kind of sneak up and tell Graham. You'll be able to cover, won't you, while we're off watching Star Wars. And then the next pair went off to see the next screening of it. I can remember when it's got weird circumstances, but otherwise, no. They become part of that of you.
Sure.
So it's and so they definitely influence you.
Yeah, there's a lot of science fiction, and I think this tends to be just the nature of like Hollywood, that there are more science fiction movies than fantasy movies. But there are some fantasy movies from around that era, late 70s through the 80s. Were there any of those that kind of had an influence on Warhammer Fantasy that you recall?
Not really that I remember. I mean, you've got Conan, but I absolutely adored the Conan comics. And I don't I'm one of the few, I really don't rate the Conan movie at all. I just don't think that. I love Arnie and other things, but not as Conan is. Conan is live and intelligent, and swift, like a panther. It's kind of like, and that's definitely not.
Yeah, you couldn't be further apart from that, right?
No, so it really didn't work. You've got that. You've got Hawk the Slayer. You've got these movies. They've got their own kind of tone. I think there was the Lord of the Rings animated.
Sure, the Ralph Bakshi one.
Yeah, but I think that to me they didn't get much traction. When I think back to when I was thinking back to this list, films that have influenced me, very few of the fantasy films did until Lord of the Rings came along, which was why it was so satisfying to finally see a fantasy movie that felt really great in that kind of way. And I do struggle to think of any other what you'd call kind of like fantasy, good fantasy movies from the 70s and 80s.
A couple that spring to my mind that I'm always curious about whether they played a role are things like The Princess Bride or Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal, those kinds of movies.
Okay, I don't remember them doing that. Princess Bride, for me, I tend to associate with it a bit later on because I don't think I saw it when it came out.
Right.
And I caught up with it later, and it's just a magnificent movie. Labyrinth I would have seen because I really like David Bowie, but I don't remember them influencing what we were doing, really. I think that Warhammer, the whole process of it felt kind of like slightly different. That world that was created. It was much more influenced by the way that D&D works and the Lord of the Rings work. So it was influenced by fantasy books.
Right.
And I think you could definitely pick out some that you'd kind of look at and say these were influential on Warhammer. But there weren't very many movies. I think because doing big battles and stuff is kind of hard.
Sure.
And that's such an element of Warhammer. I think that for me, I love Age of Sigmar. I've designed it and stuff like that, so I've got to. But Age of Sigmar and 40k are basically skirmish games. They're about the little bit of the battle. It's why they're very Hollywood-like in many ways, because you've got that. That's the bit that Hollywood's interested in. Is where the fight goes on with the hero in it. So it's that close-up kind of little bit, the main focus. Whereas Warhammer and the old world now are about a battle. So you've got your formed units kind of laid out, and what they remind me of is looking at maps for ancient battles or Napoleonic battles. It's that kind of like the blocks and the arrows saying, I'm going to crush his right flank with my cavalry while my infantry fix him in the centre and my artillery blow up his stuff over here, that kind of stuff. So it's less of a kind of like, they do have those fights in there, but it is less of a thing. What you're drawing on as your inspiration is kind of like a level slightly above that, and movies don't tend to really live there terribly much, which is why Lord of the Rings is so important, because of the big battles in it. Yeah. You do get the proper big battles in Lord of the Rings that feel like like the armies are lined up. There's a plan there. The siege and all the rest of it. I can't remember things like that really being in fantasy movies terribly much when I was growing up. You didn't get to see it, and you still don't. Actually, to be honest, I think it's still a rarity. Even now with CGI being as good as it is, there's definitely opportunity to do things. I guess you could say Spartacus.
Right.
Actually, thinking about it, Spartacus would be the closest that you're getting.
Or I suppose later on, Gladiator, things like that.
Yeah, Gladiator. Again, Spartacus has that particularly good bit when the Roman legions kind of like march out and form up and stuff, which is that would be the kind of thing that would get you excited. There's Waterloo from back in the day as well. Oh my God, my leg's been blown off, whatever it was. I've lost my legs. My God, so you have. But there weren't many really that immediately spring to mind compared to the books that it made me feel like, like it kind of like it, that it captured. And I think also it goes back to the way it was created when it evolved out of something that was being it was repurposing things that were originally designed for a different purpose. Whereas 40k was pretty much cut from the whole cloth. You get the same kind of thing with Space Hulk and Dark Future for that matter. They were bespoke. It's not like we've got a range of we did have a range of Space Marines and things like that, but you understand what I'm saying.
I do, yeah.
It's a slightly different process that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. So, were there any other like major influences that you can think of, or is that have we covered most of them? There?
I think we've covered most of them. I was looking at my notes here. There's some weird kind of like edge cases. You've got the Dune, the 1980s Dune movie with Sting.
Right.
I think that was mainly influential and been rather a disappointment because the book was so influential on all of the stuff we've done. I much prefer the modern version, but definitely Dune would be up there as something. And there are a couple. There are some like again dystopian, weird kind of like tone kind of like things. So you've got Soylent Green and Logan's Run. Again, which have this kind of like view. Logan's Run is quite 40k like in many ways. It's got that kind of vibe to it. And then a particular favourite of mine, which is really very kind of like out there. There's a movie called Stalker by Tarkovsky, Russian film, which is a science fiction movie. It's just weird. It is.
Quite long as well, isn't it?
It is long and almost nothing happens. It's lots of things. Basically, it's mainly about like three Russian men having long philosophical conversations in a kind of like some hellish kind of wasteland place that they're in. But it's definitely the look of it, and that again, that kind of tone, the bleakness of it is very Games Workshop. And I think it's a great movie. I love all of the Tarkovsky stuff. Kubrick and he are two of my favourite directors because they're so uncompromising.
Right.
What you think that it feels like what you're seeing is their vision, and they're happy for it to be kind of like for things not to be explained, for you to fill in the gaps. So going all the way back to the very beginning, 2001. And so I've seen it quite a few times. And obviously, when I was 8, I I think most people haven't got the foggiest idea what's going on in 2000.
Sure,
When I watched the movie, and I think that's quite deliberate on Kubrick's part. And then I made a mistake, actually. I read the book at some point in the 70s, I guess, which lays it all out and tells you exactly what's going on. I thought, damn. Well, that's because I got all kinds of theories and ideas. And then when I rewatched it again with my kids just recently, I thought, actually, I've still got all kinds of theories. It doesn't matter because this is the Kubrick version, not the Arthur C. Clarke version of the story. He's just taking his thing and he's using it he's doing that artist steal thing. He's taking a cool story and he's using it to do something that he wants to do.
Right.
Which is his own thing because it's Stanley Kubrick. It's like kind of mad.
Yeah, magnificent.
Yeah, magnificent.
Yeah, incredible. Well, I mean, it has been an absolute joy to chat about films and Warhammer with you, Jervis. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about it because it's been great.
Cool. No, I'm happy to do it. I'm always happy to talk about films.
Thank you. Next episode of the Warhammer Film Club, I'm joined by Stu from Miniature Realms to chat about Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Running Man and the Hammer horror Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. And you can listen to the entire season right now at patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery.